Hey guys, Poro here with another video, this time for my prediction for the World's 2025 Grand Finals between T1 and KT. For those of you who are unaware, I've only made official finals predictions twice before, those being for MSI 2023 and MSI 2025. Of those, I am currently 0 for 2, which means that statistically I am guaranteed to get my finals prediction wrong. Whichever team I pick here, be sure to bet the house on the other one. After a tournament that looked to have a boring knockout stage at first, but then was full of multiple crazy upsets, we now have a finals match that I never would have predicted in a million years. On the one side, we have T1 who had a shaky Swiss stage by going 3-2 by losing a game to CFO, playing a surprisingly close series against 100 Thieves, and looking messy in their win against Quay. On the other side, we have KT who were expected to see a quarterfinals ceiling at best and a Swiss exit at worst. Somehow though, fate decided to be as funny as possible and grant us telecom wars at an international tournament in Big 2025. Before even touching on the players and teams of today, the context of what the telecom wars were must be briefly mentioned. These two orgs have been rivals for over 2 decades now, with their matchups starting back in StarCraft Brood War. The two orgs both had legendary StarCraft players, and routinely clashed with each other on the biggest stages. It was definitely a generational rivalry. League of Legends has been a different story though. The rivalry here is no rivalry at all, as T1 would routinely stomp KT in every encounter. Back during the SKT days with Prime Faker, SKT would eliminate KT from domestic playoffs in 2015 summer, 2016 spring, 2017 spring, and 2017 summer, with KT's only win being in 2016 summer, a year where they would miss Worlds entirely and SKT would go on to win it all. KT would be mediocre for a bit, and when they finally returned to the top of the standings, it was more of the same. Lose to T1 in 2023 spring playoffs, eliminated by T1 in 2023 summer, didn't even get to T1 in 2024 spring, eliminated by T1 in 2024 summer, eliminated by T1 in 2025 spring, and finally, while outplacing T1 in summer playoffs, they would lose the head-to-head with them in regular season and wouldn't even get a chance to face them afterwards. So yeah, historically speaking, the matchup is quite one-sided despite KT's best attempts to form strong rosters. It makes it all the more unbelievable that somehow, 12 years after the orgs were formed, that KT would be able to make it to Grand Finals with this roster to challenge T1 once again. With that little background opener out of the way, let's take a look at the players who make up these two teams. Now, before anyone says anything about it, yes, I agree with you, the graphics for this video look a bit trash. Unfortunately, I am but one person, and in the moment I couldn't really think of what else to put, or how to format it to look better. In this graphic, you can see every champion a player has picked at Worlds so far, with a green border if I think they're notably good at that champion. Then, in the middle, I have displayed a list of every single score I gave those players for their individual games. Some context may be missing in the graphics. For example, in the support graphic, Carius Poppy isn't on there, because he hasn't picked it yet, because all the teams he's faced have either permanently banned it or have taken it away from him. I know it's one of his best champs, but it just so happens that it doesn't show up on this specific graphic. Another super obvious one is that these ratings don't account for Day 2, where I was still using a 5-point system. I went back and rewatched all of Day 1 and got all of those ratings updated to the 10-point version, but I haven't gotten around to doing that for Day 2 yet, so I didn't include them. Finally, these ratings don't perfectly take into account how strong the team's schedules were. It's more likely to get a lower rating if a super strong team is trouncing you, and it's more likely to see a higher rating if you can style on a worse team. I try to base my ratings around what specifically the players are doing right and wrong in the game, which in theory should factor in the enemy team's strength properly, but obviously it's still going to be skewed a bit. Basically, the graphics are mediocre, but they have as much information as I could fit on them with as little space taken up as possible. The top laners representing the teams are Perfect and Doran. Despite the fact that the two of them have had their ups and downs for the entire year, I personally have both of them as top 5 performing top laners at the tournament. Heading in, I viewed Doran as a high upside but highly volatile player who can sometimes carry, but can also sometimes commit some egregious game-losing mistakes. Doran has definitely been that to an extent, as while he's had his number of good games, he's also had some terrible ones. Perfect, on the other hand, is a player who I viewed as consistent, but at a lower tier among LCK tops. Perfect has lived up to the consistent mark for sure, and while I haven't been impressed with any of his individual games, he has yet to log a single bad game either in my opinion. Both Doran and Perfect have one game in particular I thought was very strong, so I want to highlight those. For Doran, it was his Ornn game against Elle in quarterfinals. I think this game expresses one of Doran's biggest strengths, and that's his willingness to take massive risks without hesitation. He makes the game-winning play for his team quite early on, as he overstays topside on a lane swap. AL definitely think Ornn is walking bot here to match Mordekaiser, but Doran, still on topside, is able to give T1 the numbers they need to pull the trigger on a dive that results in 2 kills for T1, and a Corki who would never find his way back into the game. Also, Doran's teamfights in this game were fantastic. It felt like his ults were point and click, as he hit Corki basically every single time, a huge reason as to why Hope got one-shot in so many of the fights. Doran has also had some real stinkers at this tournament too though. He's tried Mbessa twice and Rek'Sai twice, and to be honest, I really hope he doesn't pick either of those in Grand Finals. Looking at Perfect, he's not the type of player to go for massive risks or make game-altering plays, but what he has done this tournament is supported his team with consistently solid play. In LCK, I always felt Perfect was a liability for the team and would often find himself in large deficits where he wasn't useful, but in this tournament so far, he's done a good job holding it together and doing his job, which makes the lives of his teammates so much easier. I think his standout game so far was his Rumble game against Top Esports. I want to point out multiple things about this game. For starters, Rumble is not supposed to be good into Mbessa. The general sentiment for lane matchups topside this year has been that Mbessa and Rumble are the two best options, but both come with asterisks. For Mbessa, it's that she's the absolute best option if possible, but she has one horrendous matchup that is pro play viable, and that's Renekton. If Renekton is up, you cannot blind pick Mbessa. As such, the first top laner you'll see picked a lot is Rumble, but Rumble also comes with an asterisk, and it's that he happens to have a poor matchup against Mbessa and Galio. KT here decide they're confident enough to blind pick Rumble with Mbessa and Galio up against 369, who is one of the better Mbessas at the tournament, and it actually goes well for them in lane. Perfect is able to neutralize the lane and come out even, which is a huge bonus for KT as a strategy. The other thing I want to point out about this game, and this actually extends towards all the Rumble games Perfect has played, is that this guy is really good at placing equalizers. More than any other player at the tournament so far, Perfect has had the most impactful equalizers in teamfights, and I'd go as far as to say I think he might be the best Rumble player in the world right now based on what he's done in his 4 games of it. Looking at the scores I've given these two players so far, you can see the discrepancy I was talking about earlier. Of course, T1 has played many more games, so they have a bigger sample size, and this will ring true for every player, but Doran has a larger pool of games I would consider good, that being a 6, whereas Perfect more often than not finds himself at a 5, but Perfect has never gone below a 4, whereas Doran had multiple games I would have considered pretty bad. In terms of champion matchups, I'm actually liking what I'm seeing for KT here. Perfect's best champion has been Rumble, and while Doran had some good Mbessa games domestically, his Mbessa hasn't looked pretty at Worlds so far. If KT want to go for a blind pick Rumble, I see no reason why they wouldn't do it. On top of that, even if Doran did want to go Mbessa at some point, Perfect's Renekton has been solid enough that T1 will need to ban it. On the flip side, while Doran's Renekton hasn't been bad, Perfect hasn't even bothered to go for Mbessa yet, and instead has opted for tanks like Ornn and Sion. The big answer to these champions has been Rek'Sai, who has a great matchup into tanks due to her trade pattern, but Doran has also been quite underwhelming on the Rek'Sai. What I'm trying to say is that at least for the first few games where we can expect standard matchups, I think Perfect should be absolutely chilling. Usually there are answers into the picks Perfect plays, but Doran either doesn't play or hasn't been good at those answers. The one thing I would caution KT about here is that while the blind Rumble usually looks good, Doran's Galio has also been solid in the 2 games he's played it. Usually I would be hesitant to blind Rumble if it means you have to throw bans at both Mbessa and Galio, but I can envision a world for KT where they only ban Galio and then can pick Rumble as freely as they want. So overall I would say this, I do think Doran is the higher upside top laner, and has been the better top laner of the 2 in a vacuum, but when it comes to the specific matchup between the 2, I like what I'm seeing for Perfect. I can imagine a world where Doran goes for the Mbessa into the Rumble, or goes for Rek'Sai into a tank, and simply gets nothing productive done with the matchup, whereas I don't see what Doran could pick to abuse Perfect in the 1v1. Next up is jungle, and we have Cuz versus Owner. To put it quite frankly, I think Owner has been struggling so far. He's had a number of passable games, but he's also had a few extremely terrible ones. Basically, with no exceptions, if T1 have lost a game, Owner's been a significant reason as to why. He's definitely gotten a little bit better since Knockout started, but I haven't necessarily been impressed when his best games were against a collapsing top esports. On the flip side, Cuz has been on an absolute tear. While BDD has been the team's best player, Cuz is right there as well. Whether it be Kanavi, Junja, or Canyon, Cuz has completely gapped them in their games with no room for debate. The only jungler who I think has matched up well into Cuz so far is actually surprisingly his toe, but that was super early on in the tournament, and that win came pretty easily for KT either way. In terms of champion pool matchups, I actually once again favor KT here. Owner is more comfortable with some specific meta champions like Pantheon, Nocturne, and Xin Zhao, but the champions Cuz like to play that Owner plays less of, those being Trundle and Poppy, do fairly well in the individual jungle 1v1. Poppy specifically I think will be a very important pick for this series. Both Keria and Cuz will want to pick it, and both teams do very well when they get it. If KT can somehow find a way to get Poppy into an Owner Xin Zhao, that could be a great option for shutting down one of Owner's prized picks. I also want to go back to top lane matchups really quickly. While Doran is certainly good on a number of tanks, Perfect has definitely leaned more towards them, and one of the best answers into tanks is the Trundle. It seems like KT are more willing to pick Trundle early than T1 are, so the idea of potentially grabbing Trundle in a game 1 or 2 so that way Perfect's tanks are freed up for the rest of the series is an interesting strategy. It seems like KT has leaned into this idea a bit as well, as against top esports and CFO, they opened with Rumble game 1, saw Trundle in game 2 on either side, and then against CFO, once the Trundle was out, they started picking tanks in game 3. I do have to mention this though. Historically speaking, Owner's ceiling is much higher than Cuz. The best I've ever seen from Cuz was in his best of 5 win against Genji in LCK Split 3 playoffs, but even then, I still thought Owner reached higher peaks in that same playoffs. On top of that, we saw Owner pop off super hard in prior worlds when his team needed him most, and I ended up having Owner as who I thought would be the best jungler coming in. He obviously hasn't reached that peak yet, but the potential is there. Going off of what we've seen at the tournament though, I have to give the edge to Cuz this time. Next up is mid lane, and we have BDD versus Faker. I don't remember the last time I was able to confidently say this, but I think Faker is the best player on his team coming into Grand Finals. While he's had a couple of games I haven't been particularly fond of, and while I still think he has champion pool issues, it's undeniable that he's had the highest highs of any player at the tournament. In my opinion, Faker's Mel in Game 5 against Elle was the highest quality game we've seen from anyone so far at Worlds, and he's also had other tremendous performances like his Akali loss against IG, and his 2 1v9 super carry games against Quay when the rest of his team was struggling. That said, I've been seeing some crazy narratives surrounding Faker's champion pool. He currently has 14 champions locked in, which is the highest of any player at the tournament, so I'm seeing a lot of people acting like he's super flexible and has beaten the small pool allegations. In my opinion, he has not. First of all, and a lot of people seem to be forgetting this, T1 have by far the most games at the tournament. Not only did they have to go through all 5 rounds of Swiss, but they also straight up have an extra best of 5 under their belt because of the play-in against IG. On top of that, they're the only team to see a Game 5, with every other best of 5 ending in 3 or 4 for the other teams. Let's go over Faker's champion pool based on what we've actually seen so far. His Azir, Orianna, Ryze, Galio, and Talia are all great options. We knew this going into the tournament, and nothing has changed there. I think Faker's Akali and LeBlanc were also pretty solid too. He only picked LeBlanc once, and it was Game 4 into Sylas, so I'm unsure of how willing he is to pick that, but the read all tournament for Akali is that it's a good answer into Orianna because she can survive the lane phase decently and then have kill pressure on side lane later to help give her prio. I also like Faker's Mel obviously, so we'll mark that down as a usable champ as well. Now, going over the other champions he's locked in, while I like his Victor usually, I think his Annie was not good, his Cassio was not good, his Aurora was not good, his Anivia was not good, and his Sylas was not good. So while he has logged games on those champs, I do not consider those picks he can use reliably. So for Faker, I'm looking at early versatile picks being Azir, Orianna, Ryze, and Talia, and situational picks being Victor, Galio, Akali, Mel, and LeBlanc. It's not bad by any means, but it's definitely not what you would want to be working with in Grand Final either, especially when you take other factors into consideration. One that we went over earlier is that it's actually been Doran who's piloted the Galio more, as T1 picks it for him anytime Rumble is picked. If Doran goes Galio, that takes Faker's pool down from 9 to 8. The big thing though, and something I think KT can actually leverage better than the other teams T1 has faced, is that Faker's strongest champions are actually tradable. Top esports and AL can't really do it because Shanks and Cream are specialists on a whole different type of playing field. They can't trade Azir Orianna or Azir Talia or Orianna Ryze because they'll probably just lose. Instead, those teams have to simply ban out Faker's pool every single game or take an auto loss. I think KT will actually be more than happy to handshake these matchups because their mid laner is BDD, who has also been their best player, and unlike Faker's prior opponents, BDD is also a strong control mage player. He is definitely willing to pilot Azir, Talia, Ryze, and Orianna, which means that if we find ourselves in a situation where KT is willing to leave everything up, and Game 1 we get Azir versus Talia, and Game 2 we get Orianna versus Ryze, what does Faker pick in Game 3? Are we looking at a blind Victor territory? I'm not super confident in Faker's champions if that's the world we live in. BDD, on the other hand, does have access to some of the other very strong mid laners who teams like to play. He can go Aurora in a game 1 or 2, he can pick Cassio into Ryze and find meaningful value, and he can play Yone if his team wants to go towards an AP jungle style. I'm definitely more confident in BDD as the series goes later and later, so I actually don't mind the mid lane matchup at all. I do want to mention again that I think Faker has played a better tournament than BDD so far, but I haven't yet seen Faker take on a player who's willing to trade mages like Chovy or Knight, so we don't know how T1 will match up into a style like that at Worlds. I think based on what we've seen, I'll still give the slight edge to Faker, but by a very slim margin. Moving into the bot lane matchup, this is where I start to favor T1 a bit. For what it's worth, I do think Docdom has had a very good tournament so far. His champions this tournament have included a mix of utility or weak side champs like Ashe, Varus, Ziggs, and Ezreal, but he's also been willing to bust out a Caitlyn as well to try and win lane. All of it has looked solid, and I think he's been a consistent performer. The problem is that this is also Guma's playstyle as well. Varus, Ashe, and Caitlyn are champions Guma's made a name for himself on over his career, and his Ziggs isn't half bad either. I think these champions will be very hotly contested in the series, and both players will definitely want to pick it to deny it from the other player. However, the difference between the two, other than the fact that Guma is usually just a better ADC in general, is that the champions their supports like to play matter a lot here. I know I've only talked about the two bot laners for a few seconds now, but I kind of can't talk about them in depth without bringing the supports into the mix. Peter's specialty is melee champions. He likes to pick engagers like Alistar and Nautilus, or other melees like Braum. That said, he's dipped his toes into ranged picks a little bit this tournament. He's always been willing to pick Neeko, but he's also logged games of Renata and Lulu against Genji. When paired with Doctom's prio picks though, the combos are definitely lacking a bit. Usually when you go Caitlyn, you would want to pair it with a ranged bully like Karma, Lux, Morgana, Neeko, Bard, something along those lines. Peter has played Neeko, and the two of them did play Caitlyn Neeko once, but the other time Doctom went Caitlyn, it was Caitlyn Braum, which is not what you would want. Same thing for Ezreal. In theory, you can make Ezreal a pushing prio monster with Ezreal Karma. However, Doctom and Peter have gone Ezreal Alistar and Ezreal Braum so far, two supports not exactly known for winning early lanes. On the flip side, Keria does play these bully champs, and he's more than willing to pick the optimal support to hard win a 2v2. When Guma played Ashe, Keria was willing to go either Seraphine or Renata, Ashe's two most oppressive combos. Guma and Keria have gone Caitlyn Neeko as well. If possible, Keria likes to grab picks like Bard and Karma too. Basically, point being that I think Keria's champion pool facilitates Guma better than Peter's facilitates Doctom, and when you pair that with the fact that I think Guma has a higher ceiling than Doctom overall, despite the two of them being very similar in terms of playstyle, it becomes clear that I think T1 has the edge in this role. Finally, we have the supports to talk about, and this one is actually going to be a bit more interesting than one would think on paper. So we all know at this point that Keria is one of, if not the best supports in the world, and has been for years now. I thought Keria would be the best support heading into the tournament, and he was my personal pick for the best player at MSI. That said, I think Keria has been on the more underwhelming side at Worlds so far. Don't get me wrong, he's had his moments of brilliance here and there, but I haven't quite gotten what I've wanted to see from him just yet. In his defense, teams have been hard focusing him in draft. There are many games where Keria will receive 2, 3, sometimes even 4 bans to pinch his pool out. For many teams, they view his Poppy and his Bard as auto-win champions that you cannot give to him under any circumstance, and his champion pool is pretty large anyway, with his ability to pilot basically every range support in the game, and a handful of melee ones. Going off of what I've seen though, teams have spent a lot of effort forcing Keria onto engaged supports, and my opinion of his skills on those are mixed. I like his Rakan and Alistar a lot, but his Nautilus and Leona leave much to be desired. Peter is a support who is viewed as a mid-tier within the LCK, and was a bit of an odd inclusion on a Worlds team heading in. I would personally have him around the 5th to 7th range in the LCK, and I don't think he's played any better than that at Worlds. However, there's a super big asterisk I have to put on that statement. I don't think Peter has played any better internationally than he did domestically. I think he's a fairly known quantity who is playing to his ceiling already. The asterisk is that I think well over 90% of the players at Worlds have been underperforming to various degrees. Worlds will almost always be a bit lower quality than domestic play. Teams have to travel and experience jet lag, they have to play on setups not familiar to them, they need to take breaks from scrimming and practicing to record hype videos for LoL esports channels, and most importantly, they feel like they have a lot of pressure to perform since it's a massive tournament that everyone is watching. All of these factors combine to make a lot of teams and players simply play at a lower level than they would in their regional playoffs, and usually the highest quality games are played in LCK and LPL semis or grand finals. For example, I think the highest quality series we saw this year was Genji vs HLE in Split 2 playoffs to decide who the MSI 1 seed would be, and that none of the MSI best of 5s were at that level. Sometimes, a player can have a strong enough mental that they can play like themselves on the biggest stages. Faker is the player who is most notable for this, and it's why he's always able to seemingly make massive game-winning plays at every Worlds he attends. I think Flandre is also a player who's like this, and it's why even though he can lose lanes and make mistakes sometimes, he's still a super valuable asset to any LPL team who always seems to play great internationally. And joining this elite crew of players, somehow, is Peter. I've been super impressed and pleasantly surprised by Peter's ability to play freely at this World so far, and when I say he looks no better than he did in LCK, it's actually a massive compliment. He's had a number of great games so far, especially a knockout stage against CFO and Gen G, and I'm actually much less worried about him against Keria than I would have been if we were in Korea. As mentioned earlier though, I like Keria's champion pool a lot more than Peter's, and overall, I still think Keria has a significantly higher ceiling, so I want to give the edge to both members of T1's bot lane in this matchup. With all the players done, I want to talk about what I think the two teams' draft prios might end up looking like. Firstly, and the reason why I mentioned it so much, is that KT loves going Rumble in Game 1. A lot of teams are not willing to pick Rumble so early because of Ambessa or Galio answer, but KT literally has given no fucks so far about that. In their 4 Game 1s so far, they've gone Rumble 1, 2, 3 without banning Ambessa or Galio, and they like to pair it ideally with Wukong. If Wukong is banned or picked, then they go Jarvan, and if both are out, then Xin Zhao. It seems like regardless of what the enemy has, this is what KT have always been going for. It also seems like KT are picking their mid first if an OP mage is up, so KT are fans of the full topside 1, 2, 3. T1's Game 1 draft read is a lot harder to figure out. I'll be honest, I stared at it for a while and I have zero clue what any of them are thinking. Not necessarily in a bad way, just in such a way that I have no idea what they'll pick in any given game. There are some games where Keria or Faker will see one of their main champs available, and so they'll take it right away, but there are other games where T1 goes hard on some jungle ADC combo. There's a lot less consistency, which I guess can be a good thing since it means the enemy can't really predict you either, but it means I can't really tell what the game 1 drafts will look like. KT are going to be blue side for game 1, and depending on what T1 bans, BDD is more than willing to first pick Azir or Orianna. If both of them are down, then they'll lean towards Wukong first pick, and if that's down, then they go back to mid and look for something like Talia. Either way, what I assume will happen is that they'll go for an OP mid pick or Wukong first, and then Rumble 2-3 paired with either a jungler or mid depending on what their first pick was. I wouldn't be surprised if T1 do end up with something like Galio Jarvan so they can counter Rumble and have a good ult to pair with Galio ult, but I can't find any games where owner willingly picks Jarvan into a Wukong, so I'm not 100% sure there. Honestly, the more I look into it, the more my brain is just running around in circles. I'm fairly confident I understand KT's draft bios, like wanting Rumble with a fighter jungler with CC first, then a Trundle game later to make it so they can draft tanks, as well as traditional mages mid and weak side ADCs, but I have no idea what's going on with T1, so it's hard to come up with scenarios of what they might go for. What I can tell you is this: everyone on KT have a specific role they want to play within their comp, and it'll be up to T1 to win draft. I can't see a world where they find a beneficial topside, so my eyes are wandering towards what Guma and Keria can do. The fact that Keria has a better support pool to leverage Guma's pushing picks leans itself towards being able to win draft from bot side, so in my eyes a lot is riding on what those two can come up with once Keria's best few picks inevitably get banned or are off the table. I'll save you all some time and cut to the chase. I came into this grand finals with the initial hunch that T1 would win, and I was ready to fully predict them. However, the more I looked into the specific matchup, the more I thought it actually looked pretty good for KT. I think they'll be able to have a stable topside both in draft and in game, and they also have the right type of players to be able to bleed out T1's champion pools properly as we get deeper into a Fearless series. At the end of the day though, I'm deciding that having a stable strategy is not enough for me, and I'm going to stick with my original T1 hunch. Just because it looks better on paper than I thought it would doesn't mean it looks winning, and I still think T1's players almost across the board have higher ceilings. It's not impossible for KT, but it will definitely take a massive effort, whereas for T1, I feel like all they have to do is draft reasonably and play their own game. Just as KT's draft plans are solid, they're also fundamentally standard as well, so if T1 can't manage to grab at least a roughly playable team comp to answer, then their drafting is just cooked. I'm going T1 3-1 in this grand finals, predicting that Faker will finally get his 3-peat and that the telecom wars will continue to be one-sided. I'll be cheering for KT though, and would love to see BDD finally win an international tournament. That's all I have for you for this one. I have a Patreon for people who want to support me more while I'm making these videos. There are 3 tiers, each with varying amounts of benefits, including different types of behind the scenes content, and even a custom Poro drawing that I'll display in video outros. If that interests you, check out the Patreon link in the description. I'll see you all for the next one. Bye!